What's going on, everyone? I'm Travis Brown with the Eagle. We got a new little segment for you. We got something new for you this year, and I am so excited about it. The man, the myth, the legend, the king of barbecue, bets, football, all the above. Jay Arnold, former Texas A&M defensive lineman, is going to be joining us this year every Monday, maybe Tuesday, to break down the game before, maybe look ahead a little bit, give that X's and O, that inside look into what's going on with Texas A&M football. Jay, with name to be determined, we'll figure out a nice, a crafty name for this. But
something that rolls off the tongue.
Something that rolls off the tongue.
I appreciate you having me, Travis. Looking forward to doing this. It's going to be a fun time to kind of dive into the X's and O's, like you said, of what happened in the A&M game, what went right, what went wrong, and kind of go from there.
For sure. Well, let's get right into it. What's your just kind of initial observations about A&M team so far with one game in the books against Sam Houston State?
So for this, it's always tough to read into the first game of the year, especially when it's an FCS opponent. Week one's always tough. There's always going to be some sloppy ball. There's some mistakes that need to be improved upon. For me, I think the biggest takeaway is the communication from the offensive line needs to be a little bit better. And I think we're going to get into that here in a little bit about some of the issues that A&M was experiencing in the run game. My two takeaways: offensively, better communication; defensively, really love the talent that A&M has on that side of the ball. Something that I was worried about was replacing 4 starters along the defensive line up front, and I came away from that first game thoroughly impressed. Again, you don't want to read too much into it. It's an FCS program. It's the first game of the season, so there's a little bit of hesitation there to draw too many conclusions from it, but those are my 2 takeaways from the first game of the year.
But Jay, that's no fun. We have a game in the books. You have to wring your hands or celebrate wildly after one game.
We have to overreact.
Exactly.
So it's something that's always an issue when you look at new faces along the offensive line, and we'll go ahead and dive into this.
Yeah, continuity. I'll set the stage. Run game was something that A&M thought might lean on heavily with Devon Achane coming back this year, and what he was able to do, averaging the most yards per carry in the SEC at the end of that when it was all said and done last year. He only averaged about 2.9, I believe, yesterday. Had I want to say it was 8 yards at halftime. I didn't have my book in front of me, and finished with 42. When we asked Jimbo Fisher a lot about it, I use a little transcription software thing, and when I was writing my story at home yesterday, or excuse me, Saturday, I think my wife was going to kill me because I kept searching for the words twist and stunt, twist and stunt. He said it over and over again. What was these twists and stunts that Sam Houston State was doing? What was it causing trouble with the offensive line? And is this something that A&M fans should be worried about? Because like we said, it was Sam Houston State.
So the first thing to talk about this is when you're a defensive line that's going to be undersized against an opponent like a Texas A&M. So Sam Houston State knows they're going to have to create some kind of movement up front to combat the fact that they're going to be undersized. Basically, what they were doing is slanting the defensive tackle out, sending the end around behind them. So this is what we call a twist or a stunt. If it's the entire defensive line involved, or if it's just 2, which against the run game, you don't really have the time to stunt or twist the entire defensive line. It's usually going to be split down the middle. One side is going to twist against their side. The opposite side is going to twist against their side if both sides are twisting. But it gave A&M problems, especially on the left side of the line. And that's where you see the new faces, right? On the right side of the line, Ruben Fothery has been there. At center, Bryce Foster's out right now. So you have Matthew Wyckoff in there. That's a little bit of a change. You have at left tackle, Trace Dune is a first-year starter. And then at guard, I think Aki Ogunbi. I'm going to struggle with it. Ogunbi. And he's seen some playing time, but what you don't have is the continuity of these offensive line who have been together and have started games together multiple times throughout the years. This is a new line, and it takes time to communicate. It takes time to gel. So it's something that can be concerning if it continues to be an issue. But A&M struggled, obviously, with the communication. It wasn't a physical issue, is the reason that I am hesitant to worry about it. This is something that can be coached up. And that's why I would preach a little bit of caution to people who are overreacting and really concerned about A&M struggles in the run game. Not every SEC team is going to be stunning or twisting against the run game. It's something that is really only used if you're undersized and have to find some way to combat the size disadvantage. SEC opponents, for the most part, are against the run, not going to be running these stunts and twists unless it's something that A&M continues to struggle with, in which case then you have it on film, and that's something you can game plan for. But what I'm looking at, App State this week is going to be another team that's going to be a little bit undersized up front. I would expect them to use some of that same strategy that Sam Houston had. I need to see better communication out of the offensive line, especially the left side of the offensive line during the run game. Again, it's tough whenever you're a new unit and you don't have that continuity, but it's something that can be coached up. And I mean, let's be honest here, it's a new offensive line coach too. So there's a few things that'll need to be worked out, but Steve Adazio and that crew, I'm sure, will be looking at it on film and trying to improve that in preparation for this game against Appalachian State.
A lot of talk about communication between those offensive linemen. What does that communication look like? Is it simply, is it to borrow from other sports? You talk about like in basketball, calling your screens. Is it picking up? What does that communication look like between the offensive linemen? What are we talking about here?
And you can look into it a few different ways. So pre-snap, you want to look at where the defensive line are lined up. If you see the defensive end has a little bit more depth, you can kind of expect that the defensive tackle is going to be slanting across, the end maybe coming around behind him. So there's some pre-snap communication that they can get there, as well as during the game, or once the whistle blows and the ball snaps. Now, the problem with that is once the ball snaps, you have split seconds to react. There's not a lot of time. Obviously, it's something that has to be called out right away. So if you're the guard and you see your three technique or your nose in front of you slanting outside, you have to know immediately that somebody is going to be replacing him. So whether that's the defensive end coming behind, whether it's the two defensive tackles running a stunt, it's something that you have to have your eyes up and be ready to see that free runner coming around behind and be able to make that switch off to your tackle or to your center or to whoever has to pick up the guy. So that, again, it's tough because that's a split second change. And if you're going against the Texas A&M defensive line in practice, you're probably not getting a lot of those stunts and twist looks against the run game. So that's just something that's going to have to come with time. Again, you need to see immediate improvement against App State, but it's something that, if Aki sees his guy going outside, he has to immediately let Trey know that they're switching off and make that adjustment right away so that the running backs are able to get room to run, especially in what is a zone-based system. For sure.
And that little bit of communication, keeping the defensive line from getting so much penetration, you believe that'll open up the run game like Jimbo Fisher said it would, right?
It's also, I mean, Devon Achane is a very different back from Isaiah Spiller as well. Devon is incredible top end speed. I think Isaiah was a little bit more patient as a runner. And that could be something where, Achane maybe didn't get as many carries as Spiller last year, but it'll be an adjustment. And I mean, we can say this until the cows come home that there's going to be an adjustment period just because there's so many new faces along the offensive line. But it's something that I expect Jimbo will probably have to get a handle on, and it could be that A&M just leans on the passing game more this year with Haynes King under center and with the receivers that they have as weapons on this offensive side of the ball, which, to be fair, I was quite impressed with what the wide receivers were able to accomplish in their route running.
Yeah, let's segue right into that. Haynes King, the somewhat new quarterback. He's had a couple of quarters under his belt, but had that injury last year, getting the starting job again. And then a lot of new wide receivers and a lot of wide receivers that haven't necessarily had a ton of experience. What did you see in the passing game, both with Haynes King and some of the standout wide receivers you saw?
Right. It's the once and future King, right? He was a starter last year, and now he's made his way back to the starting position. So the wide receiving core, we expected a lot of talent there. Evan Stewart in the mid distance passing game, he is going to create a lot of matchup issues. Keith Brown, I don't know if anybody had him as the first touchdown scorer for this A&M team this year, but that speed was incredibly impressive, and Anais Smith as well.
How about that block by Keith Brown too for that sprung Anais Smith on that? I mean, that would make a defensive lineman proud, right?
Oh yeah. The fact that he's willing to put his head in there and make contact like that and able to break off that big reception for Anais. There's so much talent out there. And then you have Anais, Keith, and Evan, who are all smaller guys, but then Chris Marshall out there as well, as a bigger target, is something that, adds another level to this offense. And it seems like there's going to be much more of a vertical threat this year for the A&M offense. And part of that was Haynes King was taking a lot of shots downfield. And I think Jimbo heard a little bit of criticism about the downfield threat last year. And maybe that's something they placed an emphasis on in the offseason. But when you have so much speed in the wide receiving core and so much quickness, and the guys are able to run routes, I think it was a scissor concept late in the game that Anais scored again on. It's just going to create issues for defensive backfields. And as much as I was a little bit worried about the offensive line, I think everything that I had about this receiving core is positive. Maybe you want a little bit more out of the tight end spot, but when you're replacing somebody as tenured as Jalen Weidemeyer with true freshman basically along there, especially with Max Wright out, you're going to struggle a little bit. And I have to say, I think the receiver stepped up.
Yeah, as a guy in the trenches, I'm going to go ahead and throw you a curveball here because we didn't talk about this before, but as a guy who knows the trenches, what does it say to you about the fact that they have this huge tight end stable, this huge room? They brought in all of these guys, but when Max Wright goes down, they actually move Demetrius Crownover over to give a little bit more of that blocking threat as a guy who knows the blocking. What do you make of that a little bit? Because I think a lot of people thought that you'd see a lot more of Jake Johnson. You see a lot more of maybe Theo Mellon-Olstrom. We did see a little bit of Donovan Green in there as well, but not even really any Blake Smith in there as well. It was actually moving a lineman out to tight end. What do you make of that move and maybe what that says about that tight end room?
Yeah, with the true freshmen especially, even though some of these guys were able to get in there in the spring, there's still a physicality aspect that you have to kind of develop. Crownover's a big enough guy where he should be able to bring some of that physicality that maybe you're missing, especially from true freshmen coming in. And a guy like Theo Mellon-Olstrom, who also moved up a class, right? he reclassified, was originally in the 2023 class and moved to the 2022 class. It's something I think these guys are going to develop as the season goes on. And depending on what the game plan is week to week, that could change as well. And I think, especially offensively, it was probably kept a little bit vanilla this week. You don't want to put too much on film against an FCS opponent early in the year. But I do think A&M is obviously searching for more of that blocking threat with Max Wright out.
For sure. You mentioned, we'll go back to wide receivers real quick. You mentioned Chris Marshall, something that I brought up at the fact, and you can maybe push back on me on this, but for the last 5 or 6 years, A&M really hasn't had that kind of home run hit, go high point the ball kind of wide receiver. It's been 4 wide with 4 possession receivers. Do you see Chris Marshall as, he might not be that speedster, but he might be that guy who can go high point the ball, kind of a go get it wide receiver that I don't feel like they've had in a couple of years.
Yeah. So the only guy that I can think of that has had that ability was Kendrick Rogers, who was able to do that a little bit. I mean, the LSU game was obviously one example of it, but 2018 against Clemson, I think he really thrived in that role of being able to go up and get the ball. Chris Marshall has a lot of that ability. I think he also has a little more speed than some of those guys have had. So that definitely adds a dimension to the passing game that has been missing. Especially in the red zone, when you get down there and have that big target, it makes a difference. And I think Haynes is probably going to need to rely on Chris Marshall as they get down there, especially like we talked about, if the tight ends aren't as involved in the passing game, Chris Marshall is going to be the red zone threat.
Sure. So now let's get to your bread and butter, the defensive line. When we were sitting there at halftime in that rain delay, I was saying that there wasn't really a whole lot that A&M fans or coaches could necessarily be super happy about yet, other than the defensive line play and the speed of Evan Stewart. Now, things definitely turned around in the second half. Things clicked a little bit more. You saw a little bit of that more communication on the offensive line. I think things improved, but man, that from start to finish, the defensive line was probably the strongest portion of A&M's team out there. What'd you make of that? And what'd you make of those guys, especially some of those new guys they slotted in?
Yeah, I mean, from like you said, the defensive line impressed from the start on, and especially with the guy who I thought was going to be the leader of this unit, McKinley Jackson, being out. Mm-hmm. The fact that he wasn't even in the contest and the defensive line shown from the outset. I mean, anytime you're replacing 4 starters along the defensive line and 4 starters of the quality of the Marvin Leal, Jaden Peavy, Michael Clemens, I mean, that unit was just incredible last year. And again, temper your expectations, FCS opponent, don't read into it too much, but it seems like they picked up right where it left off. And I was really impressed with Fadil Diggs, especially, against the run, solid. And then they were able to rush the passer without requiring extra rushers. I mean, they could rush with 4 and they weren't struggling. And Fadil Diggs especially was getting after the quarterback. But then you saw some of the new guys. You saw Labius Overton. You saw Shamar Stewart. I mean, these guys are all threats from day one, which is something that you love to see. I know Coach Robinson and Coach Price have got to be thrilled with what they saw out of this unit early on. Disciplined play in the run game and then able to rush the passer.
I think one of the plays that stood out to me, and I know, like you said, it's hard necessarily to make a whole lot of judgments about first game of the season against an FCS opponent, moving up to BCS, but it's a team like, or not BCS, FBS, team like Sam Houston State. But when the game was still in the balance, when the game was still close early, you had a drive where I believe it was 3rd down, and the waters parted in front of Sam Houston's quarterback, and he had a wide open lane to run for the first down. Fadil Diggs had already getting pushed all the way outside of the play, came back and made a diving stop that kept them in front of the chains on 3rd down and forced them to punt. They get a first down there. You never know. And that showed a lot of good motor from what Fadil Diggs, that hype that he got from the spring ball when he got defensive MVP.
Yeah. And it's something, I mean, like you talked about the motor, that's coach speak for somebody that doesn't give up on the play. He's able to keep running. And even though he was a little bit further upfield than you would like, never gave up on the play. And using the quickness and the fact that he was constantly moving, was able to make a diving play to bring Yates down to keep him from converting. And like you said, I mean, it was a wide open lane that he had to run the ball. And it's going to take that kind of effort constantly in the SEC, especially whenever you get into late season games. I mean, you look at what Florida and Anthony Richardson was able to do. You look at, I mean, even LSU with their struggles, Jaden Daniels was a real problem running the ball. You're going to need that kind of high motor, high intensity, high effort from your defensive line to keep quarterbacks from scrambling and creating big plays.
Yeah. So we touched on the defensive line. Just general thoughts. What was some other standout performances? Thoughts on the defensive play from linebackers and defensive backs?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the guy that I'm most excited about this season, I think a lot of NFL draft pundits are as well, Antonio Johnson. He's going to be just a force to be reckoned with all year. I thought Damani Richardson had a great game as well. Tyreek Chappell's a guy that got a lot of playing time last year as a freshman, and being able to build off that experience is going to be really important. But I was happy with what the linebackers did. I think if there was one question mark on this defensive unit, it was maybe the linebacker play. No matter who they had in there, whether it was Andre White or Edgerrin Cooper, and I think Christopher Russell also stepped up and had a good game while he was in there. This linebacking core, you don't see three linebackers anymore. You're not going to see like a true 4-3. It's going to be, some kind of nickel package with the 5 DBs usually. But you have three linebackers you can depend on, and that's huge for this defense going into SEC play.
Well, and when you get a guy like Fadil Diggs, some of these real lean edge rushers, they even stood him up more, and it kind of sometimes presented a little bit of that 4 or like a 3-3, 4-3 kind of hybrid. Not necessarily you got a whole lot from A&M last year, if I'm not mistaken. It seemed to be another little wrinkle as well.
Yeah, and that could be, again, with a new defensive coordinator coming in and DJ Durkin, changing up things a little bit, also adapting to your personnel. Maybe Fadil Diggs is a guy that they see as more of a pure rusher compared to Michael Clemens at the position last year, that they feel more comfortable with him standing up. And, personally, I'd prefer him to rush the passer, but he has the athleticism to run that kind of a hybrid defensive linebacker role.
For sure. I know I mentioned that one play Fadil stood out. Any specific plays throughout the game or moments throughout the game that stood out to you as either gold stars or points of concern moving forward?
Yeah, so I do worry a little bit about some of the scrambles that Yates was able to get at Sam Houston. I think he's, a lot of quarterbacks now, you don't see too many true pocket passers anymore. People are going to be scrambling, getting out of the pocket. So it may be something where you're going to need a spy at some point to kind of keep quarterbacks in the pocket or change your rushing strategy to keep more of a containment on the quarterback. But the one thing I think was missing from this defensive unit last year, or maybe that they needed more of, was turnovers. And this defense really came through and created turnovers when they needed them. There's the interception when Sam Houston State was driving. I think Andre White was the one that tipped it. And then I'm not sure who actually ended up coming down. Jordan Gilbert came down with the interception. It's plays like capitalizing on moments like that. I think sometimes during last season, there were opportunities that A&M wasn't able to capitalize on. But they were capitalizing on those moments in this game. And that's something that's going to be important going forward. And then secondly on that, this isn't a particular moment in the game, but the fact that A&M was able to rotate in so many faces, not just along the defensive line, but in the back end as well, and you didn't see a drop off in play. I mean, the depth is what is really noticeable with this team this year. I think that's a good sign for the team going forward.
Sure. So let's go to top 3 performers of the week. Who, offense or defense, who would you say are the top 3 performers of the week?
So I think the first guy you got to go with on offense is Anai Smith. I mean, anytime a guy has 164 yards and 2 touchdowns receiving, it's kind of a no-brainer for that one. You look at the defensive side of the ball. Fadil Diggs, for me, was the best performer on that side of the ball. Took care of business. The effort, the high motor that we saw that we've already touched on, he was probably my number 2 performer. And then sticking on the defensive side of the ball, I think Damani Richardson, he was really a factor throughout the game. There's a lot of times where he was inserted in as a safety coming up into the run game and was able to make some big plays. So Damani Richardson is probably my 3rd star for this game.
And then looking ahead, App State coming to Kyle Field next year, a team that will not be intimidated by a big atmosphere and an FBS blue blood kind of opponent. They've done that for years and years and years now. They come off a game against North Carolina where they put up 61 points, should have won that game against North Carolina. What does the defense need to do to keep that kind of offense at bay? I know it's not necessarily apples to apples. And maybe what are a few of the things, both defensively and offensively, that you'd like to see improve from week 1 to week 2, if we're going to push that cliche that that's the biggest growing point in the season for a team?
Yeah, so the thing that we talked about with the offensive line, communication, that's the thing that you really need to see improvement on. App State's going to use some of that stunning and twisting that we saw from Sam Houston State due to the fact that they're going to be undersized up front. Defensively, there's not too much I want to see improve on. Chase Bryce, I don't think he's going to be able to scramble quite as much as Yates was able to against this A&M defense. But what I want to see to limit the ability of the App State offense to execute is to keep that pass rush up. A&M still needs to be able to rush the passer with 4 rushers and not have to rely on exotics and blitzes to get pressure on Chase Bryce. Obviously, anytime a team can score 61 points, they're going to be an offensive threat. The back end is really going to get tested next week. You want to see Damani Richardson and that crew step up, and it's going to be more on their shoulders, because I think Chase Bryce and this Appalachian State offense are going to be prepared for quick passing game. I think they know that they're going to get some pressure from Fadil Diggs and that crew up front. I think they're going to be quick passing game, something a little bit different from what we saw at Sam Houston State. And I'm expecting Damani Richardson and the back end to get tested. They need to make sure that they step up and have a good game against Appalachian State and limit that offense.
Jay, you're known for your 3 things. Let me make sure I got this right: barbecue, bets, and ball. Is that how this works?
I think that'll work.
But what is the blog? It's barbecue.
It's barbecue, bets, and beats.
Beats.
The beats is just I think we've talked about this before. We're both Texas country music fans.
Okay.
So the last bit of it is a little bit of music, but.
First off, tell the people where they can find you.
Right. So if you want to check out the barbecue bets and beats, you can go to jarnold.substack.com. If you want some more A&M focused content, you can go to goodbullhunting.com and see some of my stuff there. And I actually do a little bit of NASCAR writing for Apollo Houston as well. So I like to keep my options open. I like to talk about quite a bit.
Let's close it out with this then, because we talked about some ball that that goes in the bets and everything. Maybe we can get some beats here in the, there was the great Robert Earl Keen in town this weekend. So that was a little bit of your beats. Name me what's the barbecue place to hit up? What's on the top of your list right now?
Oh man, it's so hard to pick just one. But I'll tell you this.
Which one's on your mind right now?
With App State coming to town, obviously Texas has its own style of barbecue. North Carolina has its own style of barbecue as well. They're more famous for the whole hog type of barbecue. I'm going to be going to Feegis Barbecue down here in Houston this week, getting some whole hog from the crew over there, because it is a fantastic change in pace from the typical Texas style. Whole hog, if you haven't had it, is great. I highly recommend it. And I can't wait to get over and get some of that this week.
Jay, I am so excited about the season, being able to break down games with you. We both know I'm more of a baseball soccer guy, so I need to get the X's and O's in from somebody who knows it, and there's nobody I'd rather have than you. I look forward to keep doing this each week, so be sure to check back on theeagle.com for more of these each week. And Jay is always online tweeting with that blue check mark on Twitter. So be sure to hit him up there and see what he has to say. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you again next week.